King of the Buffalo. Many years ago, great big herds of buffalo used to roam back and forth over a big country we called the Plains. That country now is covered with farms and homes, and the buffaloes are gone. Back then, there were no farms there. It was buffalo country. The buffalo were like our cattle, but they are bigger. The bulls were great big heavy fellows, and they would fight with each other and with anything that got in their way. There was one of their great big bulls that had whipped all the other bulls and everything else that he met on the wide plains. He had not found any kind of animal, nor any man who dared to fight with him. He thought he was the king of all creation. When he saw a man come driving out on the plains in a wagon with a team of oxen, he thought they had no business in his country, so he hooked the oxen and tipped over the wagon, and the man had to crawl down a hole in the ground to keep from being stomped to death. Then the old bull went off bellowing long and loud, for that was his way of bragging about still being the big boss. That was in the springtime when all the buffaloes were traveling northward to the summer range. In the fall, when they came back to the winter range, something new had been made in their country. It was a long road made of iron, a railroad. When the old King Buffalo saw it, he didn't like the looks of it. He went up on the grade and smelled it and looked along it to the west, then to the east, and he saw a strange-looking thing coming along it towards him. It was a great big thing, puffing and panting and blowing out a lot of smoke as if it were mad or all out of breath. And that puffing, panting thing was coming right into his reservation where he was king, and no one had any right to do any puffing and blowing but him. He got right up between the rails and looked at that thing and snorted, but it just let out a loud, defiant bellow and kept coming right on towards him. He didn't know what it was. He didn't care. But it was a steam locomotive, and when the engineer saw him on the track, the engineer blew the whistle, thinking to scare him off. That train whistle made the old bull madder than ever. He lowered his great big head, and his black eyes looking mad as fire. He ran down the track to meet that locomotive, expecting to pitch it off down the grade on one side. The big bull and the iron locomotive came together. Ker-smash! But it was not the locomotive that went off in the ditch. The big bull gave one loud, surprised bawl and landed down on the side with his back broken. The bull never stood up again, and the locomotive went right on and left him. Other locomotives came too and went right on. The railroads were built clear across the country to the Pacific coast. Now, it is not just locomotives that come puffing along in a surprising way, and it is not just silly old buffaloes that get pitched off the track with their backs broken. Sometimes it is silly people. When the new thing that comes along happens to be the truth, don't you dare get in the way of it or you'll get hurt. Sometimes a man says he has found something new, or he has invented something very different to what men ever knew before, and people laugh at him and say he is crazy, or maybe they get mad and want to kill him. Now when you hear someone say a new thing that you don't like, you just wait a little while to see if it is the truth, so you won't be like that silly old bull. 100 years ago, there was a man named Samuel F.B. Morse who told people he had found a way to send messages through a wire. Always before that time, if anybody wanted to send a message, somebody had to go with it. Somebody had to go afoot, or on a horse, or in a wagon, and it took a long time to send a message of any kind very far away. But Samuel F.B. Morse said he could send a message through a wire, and the message would go right at once, quick as lightning. It would be there as soon as you sent it. We have been sending messages of that kind for 100 years, but we call them telegrams, and we don't think anything about it. But at that time, it was a new thing, and Mr. Morse went to the Congress of the United States to ask the smart men there to help him put up a telegraph line from Washington to New York. But these men in Congress were like that old bull. They hadn't seen anything like that before, and they thought it had no right to be. So they laughed at it and made fun of it and called Mr. Morse a fool. They talked so mean to him and made so much fun of him that he went away and left them. But what he had found was the truth, and it was going to go right on, just like that locomotive went on. In a little while, someone went and tried what Mr. Morse had told them, and they found that they really could send messages through a wire. It was a wonderful thing. It was too good for them to try to get along and any longer without it. They made telegraph lines and sent messages all over the world, even under the sea. And then they laughed at those men in Congress and called them fools. And the men who had mocked Mr. Morse looked about as silly as that old bull when it went rolling down off the railroad track. Sometimes what men say is not the truth, but when the Lord says something, no matter how strange it sounds, it is always the truth. Anybody who tries to stand in the way of it is as silly as that old buffalo bull. One time the Lord's people, the Israelites, were traveling in a big company through a dry, hot wilderness, and they came to a lot of snakes, poison snakes that crawled into their tents and into their bedding, and when the snake bit them, they would die. They had to be watching all the time, day and night, to keep the snakes away, and some of them were mourning and crying all the time because of those who had been bitten and died. They were in an awful lot of trouble. So they prayed to the Lord and asked him to please take the snakes away, or to tell them what to do to get away from the snakes. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, their prophet, and told him to make a brass image of a snake and put it on the end of a long stick and hold it up so all the people could see it, and to tell the people that if they would look at it, they would be free from the snakes. What Moses told them was the truth, for the Lord had said it, but to the people it looked strange. They couldn't understand how that could help them. They had expected to have some great and unusual thing shown to them, maybe to have their prophet curse the snakes so they would all die. Instead of that, it was just this simple thing. They were to look at the brass snake on the end of a stick, and they would be freed from the bites of the snakes on the ground. Some of them said it was that was silly. It made them angry, and they turned their heads the other way. But that was the truth, the word of the Lord. And those who looked as the Lord had said lived and went on. They who refused to look were like the old buffalo, fighting against the thing that was going to go right on. They who refused to look died there in the wilderness, and the others went on towards the promised land. Over 100 years ago, the Lord could see a lot of bad things that were going to happen to men, making them weak and sick. He told the prophet Joseph Smith that people should do what people should do so that instead of being weak and sick and dying before their time, they would be able to run and not be weary, to walk and not faint, and to have healthy bodies and clear minds. It is called the word of wisdom, and a few people believed it, accepted it as the truth because it came from the Lord, and those few people have health and strength and joy in living. But most people, if they heard it at all, just mocked at it and called it silly. So the world is full of sick people, weak people, and people who are discouraged and cannot understand. They are like that silly old buffalo. They are fighting against the thing that is going to go right on when they are dead.